Imagine this. You are standing in the middle of a heated argument. Your heart is pounding. Every word feels like a weapon, every sentence a battle. You carefully craft your next response, determined to prove that you are right. But the other person? They are doing the exact same thing. Neither of you is listening, only waiting for a chance to strike back. And then, Nietzsche steps in. He does not pick a side. He does not tell you what to say. Instead, he whispers something unsettling in your ear. You have already lost. What does he mean? You are fighting, you are defending yourself, you are standing your ground. How could that mean defeat? Because, according to Nietzsche, the moment you engage in this kind of battle, you have already surrendered your power. True strength, he argues, does not come from fighting to be right. It comes from something far more unexpected. So, what is this hidden power? And why does silence often speak louder than words? Let's dive into Nietzsche's philosophy and uncover the silent trick that gives you real power. Most people believe that power comes from winning arguments, proving others wrong, and dominating conversations. But Friedrich Nietzsche had a completely different view. He believed power was not in words. It was in control. Why do people argue? If you've ever found yourself in a heated argument, you know how quickly things escalate. But have you ever stopped to ask, why do people argue in the first place? Nietzsche would say that most arguments are not about truth, but about deeper psychological needs. Ego protection. People argue because their identity is at stake. Accepting they are wrong feels like losing a part of themselves. The mind resists this at all costs. Power struggles. Many debates are not about facts or logic. They are battles for dominance. Who speaks last? Who controls the tone? Who makes the other back down? Herd mentality, social validation. Some people argue not because they believe in their point, but because they want to be seen as smart, confident, or strong by their peers. Nietzsche saw these behaviors as signs of weakness. He believed that those who react emotionally to arguments are being controlled. The moment you let someone provoke you, you have already lost. Nietzsche's will to power and the Übermensch. Nietzsche's famous idea of will to power is often misunderstood. It's not about brute force. It's about the ability to impose your will on reality. This does not always require words. Sometimes, the strongest power is the ability not to react. And this is where the Übermensch comes in, the ideal superior individual in Nietzsche's philosophy. The Übermensch is not emotionally reactive like the average person. He does not argue just to win or prove a point. Instead, he chooses when to engage and when to remain silent. Because power is not about talking, it's about controlling the entire interaction. Example, imagine a meeting where two people are arguing. One is loud, aggressive, trying to prove they are right. The other, calm, collected. They listen more than they speak. They don't get dragged into emotional back and forths, but when they finally say something, it's powerful, well-timed, and shifts the entire conversation. Who really holds the power here? Nietzsche would argue that the person who stays in control, who doesn't react emotionally, always wins in the long run. Why strategic silence is more powerful than winning arguments. Silence, when used correctly, is not weakness, it's a psychological weapon. It forces the other person to reveal more about themselves. It makes them feel uncertain, making them second-guess their own words. It creates tension, and tension makes people uncomfortable, which gives you control. The Übermensch doesn't just stay silent in arguments. He uses silence as a tool, a pause, a moment of restraint, a well-timed response that flips the conversation in his favor. This is why Nietzsche's version of power is not about fighting. It's about mastering the battlefield before the fight even begins. Silence is not just the absence of words. It's a tool, a weapon wielded by history's greatest minds to dominate battles of intellect, business, and war. Nietzsche's idea of power was not about loud arguments or winning debates. It was about influence, control, and strategic restraint. Let's explore three legendary figures who embodied this principle: Socrates, Steve Jobs, and Miyamoto Musashi. Socrates' method: winning without fighting. Socrates never engaged in traditional arguments. He did not yell, attack, or try to force his point. Instead, he used a technique so powerful that it still shapes intellectual discussions today: the Socratic method, a way of questioning that made people expose their own contradictions. Imagine this. A proud Athenian politician claims to be the wisest man in the city. Instead of outright challenging him, Socrates simply asks, "What is wisdom?" The man, eager to prove his intellect, begins defining it. But with every question Socrates asks, the definition falls apart. The politician, once so confident, now stumbles over his own words, realizing he has no true grasp of the very concept he boasts about. Socrates did not need to tell people they were wrong. He made them realize it themselves. He understood a fundamental truth. People don't accept what you tell them. They only accept what they discover on their own. This is the essence of silent power. Instead of engaging in pointless shouting matches, ask questions that lead people to question themselves. Steve Jobs' strategy, the art of controlled conflict. If Socrates dominated through questioning, Steve Jobs dominated through strategic persuasion. He did not avoid arguments, he orchestrated them. His leadership at Apple was not about debating every small detail. It was about controlling the larger conversation. Jobs had a simple yet powerful principle. You don't waste energy on unnecessary fights, but when something truly matters, you go all in. One famous example was his battle with his own team over the iPhone's design. Engineers wanted physical buttons. Jobs wanted a full touch screen. Instead of arguing endlessly, he led them to see his vision. He let them debate, let them express their concerns, until they realized through his guidance that a touchscreen device was not just possible, it was inevitable. He did not tell people what to think. He made them believe it was their idea all along. Most people argue out of ego, to prove they are right. But Jobs argued with a purpose, to win people over, not to prove a point. And that's the key. If your words don't move people toward action, they are just noise. Miyamoto Musashi, the silent samurai, who won before the fight began. Now let's go beyond philosophy and business, to the battlefield. Miyamoto Musashi, the undefeated samurai, understood a simple truth. The best way to win a fight is to never draw your sword. Musashi won over 60 duels, but not just through physical skill. His greatest victories were psychological. He played mind games, unsettling his opponents before the battle even began. One famous example, his duel against Sasaki Kojiro. Kojiro was a master swordsman, known for his deadly speed. But Musashi didn't challenge him head-on. Instead, he showed up hours late to the duel, making Kojiro furious. By the time Kojiro finally faced him, he was so blinded by anger that he made mistakes, allowing Musashi to defeat him with ease. Musashi knew that if your enemy is emotional, they are already weak. Nietzsche's philosophy aligns perfectly with this. The Übermensch does not react. He controls the reaction of others. Musashi proved that silence, patience, and psychological dominance are often more powerful than brute force. The common thread: power through strategic silence. What do Socrates, Steve Jobs, and Musashi all have in common? They never wasted energy on useless arguments. They did not react. They dictated the terms of engagement. They understood that true power is not in words, it's in influence. The next time you feel the urge to argue, ask yourself, am I reacting emotionally or am I controlling the situation? Because true power is silent. Why do we argue? Why do we feel the need to prove ourselves right, to fight back, to defend our ideas even when the argument is going nowhere? Most people believe that arguments are about truth. They are not. Arguments are about power. The more you argue, the more you reveal about yourself, your insecurities, your emotional triggers, and most importantly, the fact that someone else is controlling your reaction. Nietzsche understood this deeply. His concept of will to power was not just about physical dominance. It was about controlling yourself so well that others fall into your influence without even realizing it. And modern psychology proves just how accurate Nietzsche was. Why do people get trapped in arguments? Arguments are not logical, they are psychological. When we argue, we believe we are standing up for our beliefs. In reality, we are often just reacting to deep-rooted psychological triggers. Let's break it down. 1. Cognitive biases. Your brain wants to win, not learn. Our brains are wired with biases that make us terrible at arguing rationally. The biggest culprits: confirmation. Bias. We only look for information that supports what we already believe. Backfire effect. When someone challenges our beliefs, we don't change our minds, we double down. Dunning-Kruger. Effect: the less we know about something, the more confident we are in our opinions. These biases make most arguments pointless. No one actually listens. Instead, they just wait for their turn to speak. Nietzsche's Übermensch avoids this trap. He listens, observes, and chooses whether the conversation is worth engaging in. 2. Emotional triggers. Why we take arguments. Personally, have you ever wondered why some arguments make you furious while others don't bother you at all? That's because we don't argue over logic, we argue over identity. When someone disagrees with us on a deep level, it feels like a personal attack. That's why debates about politics, religion, or philosophy turn ugly so fast. Because people don't just feel like their ideas are being challenged, they feel like they themselves are being attacked. This is why the most powerful people in history never argue emotionally. If someone can make you emotional, they control you. The Übermensch does not fall for this trap. He does not react. He observes, analyzes, and then decides whether or not to respond. 3. The need for validation. The real reason people argue. At the core of most arguments isn't truth, it's ego. People don't just want to be right, they want to be seen as right. Nietzsche understood that most humans seek validation from the herd. They argue not to find truth, but to gain approval. But the Übermensch does not need validation. He creates his own truth. Think about the most influential figures in history. Did they waste time arguing with critics? Number. They focused on their vision, ignored distractions, and let their actions speak louder than words. Nietzsche was ahead of his time. His insights on power, control, and silence align perfectly with modern psychological research. Let's break it down. 1. Power dynamics in social interactions. Social psychologists have found that the most powerful people in any group are not the ones who talk the most, but the ones who control the flow of conversation. They don't interrupt, they don't over-explain. They choose their words carefully, making people hang on to every sentence. This is why powerful leaders rarely raise their voices. They don't need to. When they speak, people listen, because they have already created an aura of authority through their silence. 2. The role of self-restraint in persuasion. Research in behavioral psychology shows that people who stay calm and composed in arguments are far more persuasive than those who get emotional. Why? Because humans are wired to see calmness as confidence. Nietzsche believed that true power comes from self-mastery. The Übermensch is not a slave to his emotions. He does not react, he decides. And that makes him untouchable. The real reason Nietzsche saw silence as power was not because he wanted people to avoid conflict. It was because he knew that the one who controls his own reaction controls the entire conversation. Let's put this into perspective. If someone insults you and you react, you have lost. If someone challenges you and you feel the urge to defend yourself, you have lost. If you get pulled into an argument just to prove you are right, you have lost. But if you observe, stay calm, and respond only when it serves your purpose, you have already won. Nietzsche's philosophy is not about staying silent forever. It's about choosing your battles. Ask yourself, am I speaking because I want to, or because I feel forced to? Am I reacting emotionally, or am I in control of my response? Is this argument worth my energy, or am I just feeding my ego? Because true power, as Nietzsche saw it, is not in words. It's in the silence before the words, the pause that makes others lean in, the decision to speak only when it matters. And that is the silent trick that gives you power. Silence is powerful, but does that mean you should always stay silent? Silence can be a weapon, but wielding it indiscriminately can be just as foolish as speaking without thought. If silence were the only path to power, then history's greatest minds, philosophers, revolutionaries, and visionaries, would have remained unheard. Yet, they spoke. Because real power is not in avoiding conflict. It's in knowing when to engage and when to hold back. Nietzsche's will to power, conflict as a path to mastery. Many misinterpret Nietzsche as an advocate of withdrawal, of detachment from the struggle, but his concept of the will to power was never about passivity. It was about domination, growth, and self-overcoming. Power is not in silence alone, it's in control. Avoiding conflict completely is not wisdom, it's fear disguised as restraint. Mastering conflict does not mean rejecting it, it means using it as a tool. Nietzsche's Übermensch does not argue over petty things, but he also does not run from necessary battles. He knows that conflict can be a crucible for strength. Why do most people avoid arguments? Because they're uncomfortable. But Nietzsche understood that discomfort breeds strength. He saw struggle as necessary, not as something to be avoided. Weak thinkers avoid challenges. Strong thinkers welcome them because challenge forces refinement. Imagine a warrior who never enters battle. A blade that is never tested against steel will never be battle ready. In the same way, a mind that is never challenged remains dull, weak, and fragile. Without intellectual conflict, your ideas remain untested. Without struggle, your convictions remain hollow. Think about the boldest thinkers in history. Galileo was condemned for challenging the church's view of the universe. Socrates was sentenced to death for questioning conventional beliefs. Nietzsche himself was dismissed as a madman in his time, yet today, his ideas shape modern thought. Their power did not come from silence. It came from choosing their battles wisely and engaging in necessary conflict. There's a critical difference between arguing to prove you are right and arguing to shape reality. Nietzsche understood this. The greatest leaders, philosophers, and visionaries don't avoid arguments. They use them strategically. Consider. Socrates did not attack others' beliefs directly. He questioned them until they collapsed on their own. Nietzsche's writings were designed to challenge, provoke, and shake people out of their mental complacency. Steve Jobs didn't avoid conflict. He used it to push people beyond their limits and drive innovation. Powerful people don't argue for validation. They argue for transformation. They don't fight to win debates. They fight to shape the world in their vision. The Übermensch does not argue to satisfy his ego. He argues with purpose. Here's when you should engage. When the argument sharpens your thinking. When it reveals deeper truths. When it pushes you or others to grow. When it shifts power in your favor. But here's when you should not. When you are just defending your ego. When the other person is not open to change. When it's a pointless emotional battle. When your silence itself is a power move. Arguing without strategy is weakness. Arguing with precision is power. Nietzsche was not afraid of arguments. He embraced conflict, but on his own terms. If an argument makes you weaker, avoid it. If an argument makes you stronger, engage with it. If an argument is just a distraction, ignore it completely. If conflict makes you stronger, it's not something to be avoided. It's something to be mastered. True power lies not in silence alone, but in knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. If you had the choice between never arguing again or mastering the art of influence through conflict, which would make you more powerful? Imagine this. You wake up one day and a voice tells you, you only have 100 words left to speak in your entire life. Every sentence, every word now carries weight. Would you waste them in a heated argument? Would you spend them trying to prove yourself to someone who isn't even listening? Or would you choose them carefully, like a warrior sharpening his final blade before battle? This is where real power lies. Nietzsche understood something that most people ignore. Words are currency. The more you spend them carelessly, the less valuable they become. Now, picture yourself in an argument. Your heart races. Your mind floods with comebacks, defenses, and points you're dying to prove. But stop. Breathe. Ask yourself, who truly holds the power here? The one frantically trying to prove himself? Or the one who knows when to stay silent? Because silence is not weakness. It's strategy. It's control. It's the art of making others question themselves without you ever needing to convince them. So, here's the challenge. The next time you're about to argue, pause. Instead of reacting immediately, observe. Watch how the other person reveals their weaknesses. See how they show you their fears, their insecurities, just by the way they speak. And then, when the time is right, choose your words like a master, or don't speak at all. Because true power is silent. Want more insights on philosophy, psychology, and power? Hit subscribe and turn on the bell icon so you never miss a deep dive into the ideas that shape the way we think and live. Stay sharp, stay powerful,